give me the opportunity to come. So uh, more people will join us without further ado. Just wanted to do a brief presentation of who Miriam is. Miriam, you are a jack of all trades. Let's put it
Yes.
that way. Miriam has been working in energy in general. Miriam publishes in newspapers. She publishes academically. Miriam also is a lawyer. Miriam also has a PhD in literature, I believe. So you are a jack of all trades. You are. I still remember an article which I searched before this for presentation, where you use an analogy of Julius Caesar in one of your newspaper articles. So quite
Oh
interesting.
yes,
Yes.
when the CEO of CFE was going to betray the president.
Okay. So it's very interesting because I worked with a lot of energy lawyers from US, from Asia, and most energy lawyers are very law abiding. They don't use this kind of literature analogies. The type of analogies they might use will be like sport analogies or analogies that relate with things like agriculture or industry. They never use these references. So Miriam, so thanks once again. It's a pleasure to be with you. So Miriam also is affiliated to several institutions in Mexico, United States, abroad. Hopefully, Miriam will join also our consultancy as someone that can help. And so Miriam, one of the things I liked about your views is that your views are very rooted in reality. They are not like extreme views from either point. So your views have also have you have a very global view. So, for instance, I come from Africa originally, but I've been living in Europe and in the West most of my adult life. And I have this global overview of how the energy transition is quite important. And the energy transition also means tackle energy poverty. So,
Right.
so it's an issue that people can't forget. But I wanted to hear from your own views, considering your own experience, considering your vast knowledge of energy markets in general, from electricity markets to strictly oil and gas, where I started my own career. So, how do you see the energy transition going? And I will leave the floor with you. So, Miriam, thanks once again for accepting this challenge. Don't worry about the people that are here because this will have a great impact. Many people will listen to this amazing um, uh, webinar after this is recorded. So thanks, and the floor is yours, Miriam.
Thank you very much. I want to thank anybody who's here, and I'd like this to be more of a dialogue than actually a presentation. I don't have any slides prepared because I was expecting to have a conversation with another two people. But the first question that I'd like to pose is, what does energy transition mean? Because in as much as there are commonplaces about what an energy transition is about, there is a lack of definition of what it actually is. So an energy transition has several components. Basically, the number one is a significant switch in the energy basket. And that really depends on the primary sources of energy that are available in each country. You cannot compare China with Mexico, with Angola, with the US, or with Japan, or with India. So therefore, you have to get the specifics of each country's energy basket to decide what an energy transition is and how it can be undertaken and under what circumstances, and with which costs. So that would be my first my first question. So in the case of Mexico, which is very similar to the case of the US, because it's the market that holds the most proximity to Mexico, although the markets are very different, they have a very similar view of what an energy transition is. Now, the concept of energy transition that we have in Mexico stems from the legal definitions of the last administration. During during the last administration, which was the Peña Nieto administration, we had an open market view of the energy sector. I want to give a little context about what the energy market in Mexico has been, because it's completely unusual in the world. I think it's the most close to resemblance would be the Kuwaiti energy market, which has remained closed. Until 2013, Mexico had a rather closed energy market in which we had two not legal monopolies, because according to the Constitution, they weren't monopolies, but they were, but they had exclusivity for the provision of certain goods and services. We had a national oil company, and we had a national power company that dominated basically every single sector of the value chain, every single link of the value chain. So at that moment, we needed the approval or the support of the government via these companies to actually engage in an energy transition. Meaning, without Pemex, the national oil company, and without CFE, the national power company, we had absolutely no hope for an energy transition, basically. And mainly with CFE. CFE, the national power company, wasn't actually a very big entry barrier for an energy transition, because it had no interest, and has no interest still with to have generation with solar and wind sources. Now, it does have hydroelectric power. It has a significant hydroelectric power, but around 60% of Mexican power is still generated with combined cycles powers facilities that are fed with gas. As 2006, we see a change because President Calderon stimulates and actually enacts two pieces of legislation that are very important to talk about the transition. And one is the law for the promotion of renewable energy, and the other is the energy transition law. But still, they are very marginal to the dominance of the national company, Pemex, and the national power company, meaning CFE. So they live in a separate world, these renewable projects. They're connected to the grid. They have a highly subsidized rate to use the transmission grid, but they live in a separate world. They're either isolated co-ops, or they feed specific users. And the capacity, the power capacity, is actually really, really marginal. We're talking about 2%. And actually, say CFE's transmission grid does not receive any renewables for the public service. Now, after the Peña Nieto wins, and we have a big energy reform in which the totality of the oil and gas change is open to the private sector, and certain segments of the power market are open to the private sector, meaning generation and trading of electricity. Supply is also open, but only for large users. Well, large, quote unquote, we're talking about 2 megawatt per day users, which is practically nothing. So in the midst of the Peña administration, which is really a contradictory, which had actually a contradictory policy, because in the beginning, the Mexican energy reform was inspired, to use a word that I despise, or was motivated by the shale gas revolution in the United States, because they saw the abundance of shale gas, particularly in the southern states of the United States, meaning Colorado, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. And they see their power rates going down significantly. They plummeted. So Mexico says, if they have shale gas and we have shale gas, we see Mexican investment migrating to the United States, which was a very a scary thing to say, very preoccupying thing to see, that Mexican companies suddenly prefer the cheaper electricity rates in the US rather than using the cheaper labor in Mexico. They saw more competitiveness in the United States because of power rather than labor. Today, we have the opposite case. We have companies coming to Mexico because they don't want to go to China because of the labor costs and the regulatory facilities facilitating mechanisms that Mexico is providing the nearshoring. But what is missing in Mexico is renewable power. Now, after the Peña opening, we have the Andrés Manuel López Obrador administration, which was entirely phobic of renewable energy. And it's a psychological effect. I think the president was told by someone, which is Brutus, who I mentioned in my article, the CEO of CFE, that a renewable power is somehow evil. Why? Because it is variable, because you don't always have sun and you don't always have wind. And Andrés Manuel López Obrador is a great political animal. And when I say animal, I say in the best of cases because I love animals. But that's the way he thinks. He thinks about politics. And he thinks, if there can be variation in the provision of the electric service, we're going to have an unhappy population, because we're going to have intermittency in the provision of the service. So we're going to stop the investment of renewable power that boomed in the Peña Nieto administration. Of course, the motivation was initially shale gas, but in the middle of the Peña administration, in the midst of the Peña administration, we see a lot of solar coming in, a lot of solar tenders for solar power generators, which is very interesting, and it's something I do not still fully understand. I suppose that the German diplomacy did a lot of lobbying in Mexico to place their solar panels, because in Europe and Asia, they were losing markets because the Chinese solar power became so cheap. So in Mexico, transition means, number one, switching the energy mix, migrating towards renewable sources, which are still we'd have to have a lot of business coming into Mexico to actually have a significant percentage of the energy mix being generated by renewables, because we still have 2% if we exclude hydropower, which is the remaining 13%. So, and for that renewable capacity to reach Mexico, which is a very large country, and we have 130 million persons in Mexico, how many are there in Angola?
37 million at the moment.
Okay, so we're threefold, right? And
Right. But,
exactly.
But just explain, in a country, Angola is very unique in Africa because although it's a net exporter of oil and gas, its electricity mix is mainly hydro, and the potential is huge. We can run almost 100% on hydro in the future. Now hydro is about 80%, but still 50% of people don't have access to electricity. In a way, it has to do with development, but also with government policies.
Okay, and do you have sufficient transmission and distribution grids in
No,
Angola?
that's the main issue because Angola was, as you know, was at war for 40 years. So it was a brutal war. It was one of the stages of the Cold War. So there wasn't investment until 2002. Only until 2002 that the government really started to invest. So one of the big issues is the size of the country, which for Africa it's still quite big, and the issues of transmission and distribution. Also, the tariffs are not market aligned yet. So the government didn't align yet with market rates. That's why. But the current minister has changed the regulatory framework, so it becomes liberalized in the production and in the commercialization, and the grids will remain public. But still, it's in its early stages. But I would say that in the future, most of it will be hydro. Uh, there are a few tenders in solar now, but it will be marginal. I think solar will work only in smaller communities. Um, so I would say that the bulk, it's hydro.
Okay, we have hydro in Mexico, but we also have very little water. Actually, we have certain states in Mexico have been rationing their water because we're in an important hydrologic stress in a situation. I see a lot of people commenting and studying energy, but they're not commenting the link between food, water, and energy, and how those three fundamental rights, and I would say energy is a very questionable human right. I think it's an enabler of human rights, they compete amongst one another. In your case, in the case of Angola, you don't have a competition between water and food.
Not,
In the
not,
case,
not at the moment, no.
not at the moment. In Mexico, we would have heavily competing objectives if you were to give preference for power generation being hydroelectric plants, because we have water scarcity, we have severe water scarcity. So the precedent, because of the pressure of the power workers union, who own several hydroelectric plants, were pushing towards meeting our clean energy goals via hydroelectric generation. But that's why that's because the power workers union owned those facilities, which were sold during the past administration. And so
Really?
that's been,
Just some
yeah,
question.
that's been,
Why does that happen? Why are the unions owners? It's an interesting concept, but why?
why? Because the Calderon administration, which was from 2006 and 2012, shut down one of the state-owned power companies, Luz y Fuerza del Centro, Mexican Light and Power. He shut it down. So the Peña government, which was the succeeding government, the government after Calderon's, what he did is to make peace with a power workers union. He sold some of CFE's hydroelectric plants to the union. So when López Obrador, who's a left-wing, quote unquote, left-wing president, saw that he needed the union to support him, the oil workers union, the power workers union, be it from the former power company which was shut down, or the one who is still dominant, CFE, he wanted their support. So he said, yes, we'll have clean energy, but it has to be hydroelectric. And he actually reformed the law, the electrical industry law, to have hydro power plants to be first to be dispatched. It was interesting. So the energy switch in Mexico is actually very chaotic because it is centered on scarce clean sources such as hydros. That's been the vision. And we have a lot of sun. I don't know about you, but in Mexico, we're baking. And I don't have the scientific basis that this is a climate crisis or climate urgency, because I hear that a lot, where that we're under a climate crisis. And I've been working with an NGO, and it's been really interesting because I'm the outlier in the NGO. Number one, because I come from the oil and gas industry, unabashedly. And yesterday I was in one of the universities that actually trains petroleum engineers. We have three very important universities that train petroleum engineers: the Mexican Petroleum Institute, the Polytechnical Institute, and the UNAM, the National Autonomous University. They're the main three universities that train petroleum engineers. So we want to talk to an auditorium full of petroleum engineers about the necessity of an energy transition. And actually, one of the professors became very aggressive. Well, he stepped in late, and he missed when I said that I actually came from the oil and gas industry, that I'm proud to have come from the oil and gas industry, and that I think that oil and gas are actually magical because they produce so many things other than power. So when it comes to the energy transition, I believe that Mexico, for energy security purposes, should switch to more sun and wind, because we have a lot of it. We have tremendous sun and wind capacity, whereas we're producing 1.7 at the most million barrels per day, and we're net importers of natural gas up to 60 or 65%. So we have energy vulnerability due to the imports of gasoline and gas.
Let me ask you this, Miriam.
Yes.
So what about the potential, because everybody speaks about natural gas as this kind of a bridge fuel.
The transition fuel,
yeah,
yes.
The transition fuel. So what about that in Mexico in terms of proven reserves or potential reserves? What happened there? It's a matter of incentives or geology? Can you clarify that? I think many people would be willing to basically understand that, to listen to this webinar.
Well, Mexico has a significant potential for gas. I believe we have around 5 or 6 trillion cubic feet underground. We have been deemed as the 3rd or the 6th potential producer of shale gas, depending how many liquids, how great the potential of liquids is in that shale gas, which is distributed in Nuevo León, Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, and Veracruz. But we're talking about prospective reserves, not even possible. You know, the categorization of proven, probable, possible, and prospective. I would even categorize them as imaginary, because very, very very scant exploration work has been done in those reserves. And Pemex has done most of it, and Pemex has very unreliable ciphers because they're manipulative. They're manipulated by the government. So let's suppose that we do have 5 or 6 trillion cubic feet underground. What do we have? We have insecurity, because casually we have a curious coincidence. Where there is gas, we have drug traffickers. Why? Because they're the route towards the United States. We have terrible insecurity. So when they see money, even in the case of Pemex, when they see facilities, when they see infrastructure, what does happen with organized crime is that they migrate towards the areas where they might see investment. I don't know if that happens in Angola.
No, Angola is very different because after the civil war, the government was able to create a very strong army. So this in Angola wouldn't be possible. So it has one of the strongest armies in the continent. So there is crime, but not at the scale of South Africa, which is a very rich country, but is riddled with violent crime. So in Angola, that will be impossible, at least at this stage. The government is very centralized because it came out of a Marxist regime and they effectively won the civil war in 2002. So that's why the US is very keen to work with US. Our president even visited the White House. One of the reasons because the Angolan army also has troops in both Congos, in the DRC
Mhm.
and in Brazzaville. So in terms of security, I would say this is not an issue, not since 2002.
And the army is
It's
not corrupt?
it is, but well, I wouldn't say it's corrupt. I would say that in Angola, because of the Marxist origins, it's very centralized. So it's very difficult to break into the army. It's a very centralized structure. The analogy I usually give is look at Vietnam or look at China. This is
Okay.
how the law system. Yeah, you might have some corruption, but the centralization of power is so strong that it's almost impossible, even in terms of say instability, in terms of political instability because of poverty. In Angola, I would say it's very different. I wouldn't say it's a perfect country. If you go to Luanda, our capital city, which represents 30% of the population, unfortunately, because of the war, most people migrated into the capital city. I would say that it's much more safe than any European city, but it's not like Rio de Janeiro where you have like gangs controlling. In Angola, that would be impossible. Also has to do with the nature of the regime. It's still a country democratizing. It's probably similar to Mexico before the democracy. So, so I'll characterize it that way.
Well, that's very interesting. Well,
Yes.
the Mexican military, and I'm talking about the several branches of the military, from the army, the navy, and other special forces. They're deeply ingrained into the Mexican drug traffic market. They receive the profits, they protect the cartels, so much less they would be interested in protecting energy security. Fuel theft in Mexico is a very, very big problem. And that makes me believe that it would be a problem to achieve the second part of the energy transition, which would be switching from fossil fuels for motor vehicles to electric motor vehicles. Why? Because fuel theft in Mexico is such a big business. So I don't see any precedent that would actually stop from producing gasoline, even minimally, because stealing gasoline is such a big piece of business. I think it's illusory. I think it's a fantasy.
Let,
Number
let me
one,
ask let me ask you
yes,
this: if I'm a private company, can I fully invest? I mean, an European company that wants. Let's look at TDP Renewables, which is one of the largest solar energies in US. It's Portuguese. That's why I know it. It's very successful. If they go to Mexico, if they decide to invest, let's say in a solar farm and then sell it to the grid, is that possible, or there's
yes,
a
it
monopoly?
is.
Okay,
No, yes, it is. Generation is completely open. The problem is the permitting part.
okay.
In order to generate to sell to any final user, including CFE, you need to get a permit as a generator, and the permits are stopped. Have been no very few permits have been awarded during this administration. And that's a huge issue. So let me go. So we have the switching the energy mix towards renewable power, which also, I mean, forget the service and the residential users. We have the industrial users, which in Mexico are skeptical of actually connecting to power that is generated by wind and solar, because they see uncertainty. So during the last administration, it's really funny. The lobbying group that was the most against the enactment of the energy transition law, because it forced them either to purchase clean energy certificates or be fined. They either had to purchase, they either had to have power purchase agreements with solar or wind or geothermal, which is NEL in Mexico. They had to, or second choice, they could buy clean energy certificates from the clean projects, or third, they would be fined. So I was friends with the undersecretary of the electricity then, and he was going bananas. He was going in the energy transition.
Can you repeat again, Miriam? Think you froze. Can you repeat again? Let's wait a little bit. It's probably the internet connection. Hello, Miriam. Can you hear me? Let's wait a little bit for Miriam. I think the internet connection is not very good. Yes.
Sorry,
no problem.
everything is unstable, including the internet.
No problem. You are giving
Sorry,
the example. Please continue. Please continue.
Oh, where did I stop?
With the example of the undersecretary for electricity, I believe your friend. I think you gave that as an example.
Yes, he was under a lot of stress, because he was under a lot of pressure to have the energy transition law approved by Congress, and there was a huge lobbying from the industrialists who didn't want it to be enacted. They didn't want it to come into effect. Number one, because they had three choices. I don't know if that was recorded. Number one, they had to have power purchase agreements with solar or wind power companies. And they thought they were unreliable, because that's still a perception in many developing countries. If you don't have backup power, then you have wind and solar, you have unreliability. Number two, they had long-term contracts with power generation companies that were combined cycle. So that was unacceptable, because they would have to breach their contracts to hire renewable electric companies, or they would have to reach some form of renegotiation. Their second choice was to purchase clean certificates from the clean companies, and that would make their power generation uncompetitive. That would raise the cost of manufacturing. Or third, they would be fined at the lack of becoming green. So the biggest group of industrialists were trying to stop the energy transition law from being discussed in Congress and approved. They reached an agreement because they talked about the implementation would be gradual. And there's nothing more permanent in Mexico than gradual implementation. Why? Because the implementators of the law feel that there's a lot of pressure to implement the law. So they say, well, we're going to make an extension, like when you're a student and you ask for an extension for a paper, and they give you leeway, and a week goes by and a month goes by and you're still and the extension part of you're still using the extensions to deliver your paper. Same thing in Mexico. When it comes to implement a law, people ask for extensions. And that's what happened with the industrialists. They asked for a transition law that would allow them for the contracts to expire. And some of them at that time were 30-year-long power purchase agreements. So that would be delayed. So in order to have a true transition in the manufacturing sector, which I believe is the second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases, you have to actually convince them that this is more competitive. Now, in terms of industry, where do I see the potential of greening is with nearshoring, because the companies that would enter Mexico have financial requirements to use renewable energies to actually meet IFC standards or Equator Principle standards. But that would be an exception, and that would be only limited to the northern side of the country, or maybe the Pacific side of the country. But there would be clusters of clean companies where there is actually a strong manufacturing potential. So that's another roadblock that we're going to surpass, aside from the emotional EV hype, that we have in Mexico.
Sure. Let me ask you something. Is there potential for changes in regulatory framework in the future? I mean, in 5 to 10 years, or do you still think that there will be a lot of resistance? Because I see a lot of advantages in the energy transition in the electrical sector, mainly looking at my own country, even looking at Portugal, which I would say I wrote an article recently where I mentioned this, that in terms of electricity mix, solar is quite competitive, at least in countries like Portugal, not in Germany. I think I have a lot of doubts about the success of the energy vendor, which Germans propose. But in Portugal, it makes sense. I think at least in the last year or so, costs for energy, for electricity have been reducing. So you see any changes in the future in Mexico?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because in June we're having elections. So,
okay.
And I'm really bad at political predictions. I mean, I make a political prediction and you can be sure that it's going to be wrong. I mean, I would have a year ago, when there were two strong left-wing candidates, and one was from Tabasco and he was male and he was close to the president, I said, no way the candidate is going to be a Jewish woman who's a Berkeley graduate.
Okay.
And you know who the strong candidate is today?
No.
The Jewish woman who's a graduate from Berkeley.
Wow, amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, it's unprecedented. I mean, I'm a Jewish woman, I'm a graduate from Berkeley, but I think I'm very tickled by the fact that a Jewish woman who's approximately my age is going to be the next Mexican president. That's what we think. Okay. So the coalition of the other parties chose another woman who's indigenous. She's got Otomi roots.
Okay.
But she doesn't have the political machinery behind her. Now, okay. Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the left wing, and I'm saying left wing because Andrés Manuel López Obrador has had some policies that are very similar to Thatcher. Very little public spending, cancellation of social programs.
Okay. Wow, so, I didn't imagine that.
No, it's been completely surprising. At the end of the administration, we were amazed because, I mean, some of his policies were Thatcherian. And he stopped public spending. He stopped investing or spending in medical care, in public housing, in public infrastructure. We've had very little investment in public projects.
Okay.
So in that sense, I don't know if whether to call him a left-wing candidate, but in energy, he's been very prohibitive of private investment.
Okay.
That continues.
Mainly because of this vested interests, just like you said, no?
Basically, because this president is very curious in a way. Despite that people say that his government is very corrupt and they have stolen a lot of money and they have pocketed huge amounts of the budget for their own interest, I believe that López Obrador is not greedy for money. He's greedy for power. Very greedy. I don't see him having a mansion and 100 cars and yachts and islands out at sea.
It's like we see a lot of that in Africa, believe me. That's one of the issues we have.
I don't see him. I see some of his close collaborators aspiring to that, but they don't have the international networks to do that. For example, the former CEO of Pemex, Emilio Lozoya, he's said to be linked to the Russian mafia. I don't think, and you don't enter the Russian mafia like you knock on the door and you say, I want to be part of the Russian mafia and I want to be part of the Chinese mafia, and they let you in. No, that doesn't happen. It's a pretty select group. But the former administration had that access. Andrés López Obrador has had corruption in his government, but the results of that corruption empowers him to select the new president, who will be this woman, and it will be up to this woman to decide if she keeps the sector close to private investment, which would be a huge obstacle for the energy transition because she will be forced to maintain CFE and Pemex as a key player or to allow private investment. And I was talking to Tony Payan, who's my director at the James Baker Institute, and we're co-authors on a paper on nearshoring, which is such a headache because it's bipolar. It's like it's happening tomorrow. It's big. It's going to be the salvation of Mexico, or there are those that say that we can forget about nearshoring because of the availability of clean sources of energy, of the availability of secure line rights, the regulatory requirements that are federal, state, and municipal. And Tony Payan and I agree on something that I think is a key to understanding Mexico. Things do happen in Mexico, but they happen differently than what was expected.
Okay. They're
tropicalized, as we say, you know? Sure. Things happen that we have odd results. So what I think will happen to Sheinbaum is that she will have some form of continuance of the energy model, but with odd results, with odd changes. And let it be said, in terms of the energy transition, that Claudia Sheinbaum was part of the IPCC during 2010, when she was in Berkeley.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, she was part of the IPCC. So so she talks about the energy transition, and she says by 2030, which is tomorrow, Mexico, I know, time's fast, and the older you get, the faster it goes. I'm mind blown for that. She says by 2030, Mexico will be producing power with 50 or 60% of clean energy.
And it's very ambitious. It's very ambitious.
Extremely ambitious. And even the power company said, wow, how will this happen? They were questioning, if we are included, how will we be able to meet those goals? Sure. And she says, oh, but that includes all sources of clean energy. And she is planning to introduce natural gas in the legislation as a source of energy. So if we put natural gas into the energy mix, of course we can provide power with 50 or 60% by 2030. Actually, we could meet it now.
This reminds me another discussion which is happening in Europe. As you know, I'm following this new European Green Deal where they had to do that. Basically, say, natural gas, it's a kind of a green energy. It's not.
No, it's of course it's not. It's highly polluting.
yeah. Europe did the same because and when the Ukraine war happened, when Russia invaded, unfortunately, so this a lot of companies which were using natural gas, which was considered free, they were affected. This explains why a lot of investment now is going to North America. You feel this in Mexico? Because
yes, I mean,
a lot of European companies are relocating to North America. This is something that has been discussed here in Portugal as well.
Well, we have the United States are our closest neighbors and our main commercial partner. And during the Biden administration, we had the Anti-Inflation Act and the climate and the climate legislation. And that has impacted Mexico strongly because if we are to integrate regional markets, we would have to accelerate the energy transition. Okay. So it is very strange because we have a cleaner policy in the north that borders it with the United States and a dirtier scheme for the rest of the country that is still very much hydrocarbon based. Okay. Now, as I said, my political predictions are always wrong, but you would tend to think that Donald Trump is going to win the elections.
Yes, I think people here in Europe are with that assumption now at the moment. Yes.
Now, what will happen with the Anti-Inflation Act and the clean energy and the clean energy legislation if Trump wins?
Probably
it depends on the makeup of the Congress. But I think he will try to revoke it, and yes. I think he can. And he's very visceral. We know that.
Yes.
He acts with a gut.
True.
And he's going to do a lot of ranting and raving in favor of the hydrocarbon companies.
Let me ask you something that relates with this issue, and this is something that my students asked you in the previous guest talk, which you mentioned, and I believe you have reflected more deeply than I on this matter. How do you see the issue of protectionism, energy protectionism? Let me use this word because I don't have other in the United States. Would this affect Mexico? How do you feel that the energy transition in terms of protectionism? Because in Europe, it's clearly protectionist. It's pretty clear that yes. Europe now wants to protect its industries, and basically with the new carbon border adjustment mechanism, basically say, oh, if you don't fulfill this criteria, I'll tax you. So you can so the European industry it's protected. So how can Mexico answer this? Because Trump, it seems, though he's from the right, it seems very protectionist. Very protectionist. I mean.
Well, yes, that was a surprise, and that was another interesting similarity between Manuel López Obrador and Donald Trump. That Andrés Manuel is a protectionist from the left side of the spectrum, and Donald Trump is a protectionist on the right, on the extreme right of the equation. But they agreed. In those terms, they were agreeing to be protectionistic, so that would break the integration of a North American market. Now, in the United States, it doesn't happen as in Mexico, because we have two state-owned enterprises.
Okay.
In the United States, if you were to restrict the activity or the commercial trade of those companies that are exporting energy products to Mexico, they would raise hell.
Yes,
When Trump said
I'm
no
pretty
more
sure. Yes,
gasoline and no more gas to Mexico, I said, well, he will have to convince the companies not to sell their gas and their gasoline to Mexico.
too. That's impossible.
I mean, tomorrow the Mexican president could say Pemex is not exporting one more barrel of Mexican oil to the United States. He could do it because he's got the state owned company under control. Trump can't do that.
True.
So
Good
when
point.
people were panicking in Mexico, is that we're going to run out of natural gas, we're going to run out of gasoline, energy security is a danger. It's like, well, tell the oil and gas, the gasoline and natural gas traders that they cannot sell gasoline and natural gas to Mexico anymore.
Good point. That's a good point.
I mean, the market overrules politics.
Yes, particularly, and this is something also, perhaps this is for another discussion with the panel, which I'll invite you. It's something that has been rising is this idea of the developmental state in Asia is something I've been following because our country mainly exports to China and India. So our trading partners are Asia. And these companies are now, they are in a run for minerals in Africa. I think everybody knows this. So how do you think Mexico will answer that? So the first question is, what's the relationship between Mexico and China? I know that China now is the biggest investor in renewable energy, in a lot of these innovations. So how do you feel that the future will be? I know that that US and Canada are your largest trading partners, but can you attract investment from China? I mean, in terms of renewable energy or nuclear? How is nuclear? So it's something I wanted to ask you.
Well, nuclear is a state control activity in Mexico. Only the state can generate with nuclear. So when people talk about energy transition, and they say that nuclear is an option in the energy basket, I say, well, you would have to amend the Constitution, and you would have to have serious regulation regarding how nuclear power generators are built and operated in Mexico. I don't think the United States would be very happy with Mexico building nuclear reactors, even for power generation. Okay. I talked about this to the former Undersecretary of Electricity. She's a wonderful woman. Her name is Lourdes Melgar. And we're a country that has uranium. And I asked her, why are we not exploiting the uranium? And I said, because the United States would go haywire if we did. Okay. So I don't see the state or private companies developing nuclear in Mexico. And what was your other question?
Was about China, because a lot of Chinese companies are investing in Africa. In Angola, China is our biggest market, and we don't operate our oil industry. Our industry is mainly operated by US and Europeans. So all the major companies are there. Chevron is largest. Exxon is a block. You have ENI, BP, but largest are Chevron, Total, and BP and ENI. But in the future is something I told people in the policy making is that probably these companies will divest from oil, not necessarily from gas, and will have to look for the Asian companies like CNOC, Sinopec, or the Indians, which are also investing.
Do you really think they're going to divest in oil and gas? Because I see the contrary tendency.
Yes, companies like Total might do it, or BP. I don't see Exxon or Chevron doing that.
No, Exxon is not doing it.
No.
Exxon is not doing it. I'm proud to say that I was an attorney for ExxonMobil for about 6 years, a while ago. And they're very traditional. They're very conservative, and they know their core business. True. I mean, I had a talk with a former friend of mine who's actually the director for foreign affairs at ExxonMobil worldwide. Okay. And I wanted to hug her and kiss her when she told me that Exxon was going to become net zero.
Okay.
I mean, but she handles those types of politics. But I mean, I know the company. I admire the company, but it's either my way or the highway.
Okay.
And going back to China,
Yes, yes, please.
China does have some participation in EMP in Mexico. I think they have relinquished their contract. EMP contracts are being relinquished in significant numbers during this administration. Why? Because there will be no more rounds, because they have been canceled by the president, and they cannot build economies of scale. But CNOOC has had a couple of contracts that I think they have relinquished. The most important player from China and Mexico, it's called Zuma Energy, and it's a power generation company. I don't think they're going anywhere. They have several solar and wind plants operating in Mexico, parks operating in Mexico, and they're waiting for things to get better because they already have sunken assets. Now, Mexico would gladly open Chinese investment. The thing about that is, will it clash with a nearshoring policy? Because the United States is willing to come to Mexico and is willing to invest in Mexico, and they have already reinvested $36 billion in their current assets. It's not new investment, but it's a lot of money. They have reinvested in their current assets, $36 billion, I'm sorry. But if Mexico becomes really receptive to Chinese investment, what will happen to our diplomatic and commercial relation with the United States?
Good point. We don't have that issue.
Well, thankfully. We do. I mean, it's like Porfirio Diaz was like Mexico's long-standing dictator to whom we own development, whether we like it or not. He used to say, "Poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States."
Wow, that's quite a saying. Yeah. So when the war ended in one country, what happened is that Angola needed loans, and the Chinese basically gave us $40 billion in terms of investment. Now we owe about $18 billion. The president just went to China, I believe, last week. And he got a nod because this president has a policy of pivot to the US, but US is mainly interested in oil and gas. It's not interested in other sectors. And what Angola is now interested in is infrastructure, basically roads. We have a new project for this new refinery in Lubito. It's a few $1 billion, and the only country that will lend us will be China. So I think that the relationship will continue. So we don't have that. But in terms of oil and gas, the Chinese only have a few participations. I believe they don't operate any block. But in the future, I think this will change because Exxon, it's not very big in Angola. Chevron is. But the new blocks were discovered by Total, I believe. And Total is ambivalent because the French are very different from the Americans. I'll put it that way. I think American companies, at least in oil and gas, are more reliable in Angola. And they explored oil even during communism, even during the period where Angola was communist. Chevron was there, and Angola was supported by the Soviet Union, and the US was supporting the rebels at the time. So it was a kind of a messy situation, just to explain the situation.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we went from energy transition to many other topics, but it's been delightful.
True. So in summary, what can you give us in terms to wrap up? I don't know how much time you have, but to wrap up, can you do a kind of a summary? And
sure.
What kind of advice?
I have plenty of time.
Sure.
I'm meeting.
Thank you.
I'm meeting 2 friends from the national power company for lunch in Mexico. We have lunch at 2:00, so
Oh, okay.
So I have some time, and maybe one of the topics that we will cover will be energy transition. They're kind of old school.
Okay.
So I believe that they firmly believe in natural gas, like most people in CFE.
Okay.
Basically because of the complexities of our infrastructure.
Okay.
So let's say what are the global and domestic obstacles that could impede an energy transition? Number one is inconsistent policy. And inconsistent policy is not happening only in Mexico, but also in the rest of the world because we're in an unprecedented crisis. I mean, it's been very, very interesting for us to live during the past 4 years because we've had, I mean, my favorite song right now is No Alarms and No Surprises. I don't know if you know the song by Radiohead.
No, no, I don't.
No? I'm
No.
going to send it to you by WhatsApp because
Okay.
it's been the theme since the COVID crisis.
Okay.
And the refrain of the song is no alarms and no surprises, please.
Okay.
So we had the COVID crisis, was sent the energy markets and every market insane. It caused a crisis in the energy markets because I remember in 2020, in the midst of, I think in early 2021, the oil futures suddenly, no, in May 2021, the oil futures were selling for minus $30.38
Yeah, that was
because
crazy. I
of lack
remember
of
that.
demand. You remember that?
Yes, yes. I knew because I have a friend that does trading in Madrid. He's Portuguese.
Uh-huh.
He works with in a broker, and he was discussing this at the time.
And people were freaking. And it's because people didn't renew their oil futures because of the plummet of demand. And I spoke to some analysts, and they say it will recover in the following week, and it did recover. I mean, the barrel was reaching $20, $30,
Sure.
$40, depending on which oil basket you were referring to. But there was this energy insanity going on because of the COVID crisis, because people just stayed at home, and whereas they were consuming a lot of electricity in their homes, manufacturing and travel were at a halt. And then we were suddenly seeing the light at the end of the tunnel of the COVID crisis, and Russia invades their Ukraine. So here we go again. And we have these insane policies, especially in Germany, which has claimed to be green, and they began to use a lot of coal because they
Can
were
you
starving for gas.
what do you think about that? Because the Germans, I know a lot of Germans. I worked with the few, and they talk green, but it's a very very
Well,
strange country in that sense.
yes, they're not very strange if you look at them from political and industrial pragmatism.
Okay.
I mean, why did Angela Merkel cancel the nuclear power facilities? Not
Well,
because she was green, because after all, nothing happened in Fukushima.
true,
The reactor was under
true,
control
true.
in days, because she
True.
didn't want the Green Party in her back. And I admire Angela Merkel a great deal. Actually, my brother calls me my little Angela Merkel, because she says that I'm a shrewd market liberal.
Yes,
Anyway,
she's quite something.
she's quite something. I wish,
Yes.
as when he calls me my little Angela Merkel, said I mean, I should be so lucky. Anyway, she canceled the nuclears, and she begins to introduce a lot of green power and green, quote unquote, because I don't believe any form of energy is actually clean. because
Sure.
it needs manufacture, it needs infrastructure, it needs
Sure.
roads,
It
it
needs
needs
mining as well.
ports, and it needs oil,
Yeah, and
I mean, you
mining.
have
And
and mining and critical minerals, and you should
yes,
know that because you're in Africa,
yeah,
and Africa is a key play in the provision of critical minerals. So Germany says that it's green because it's convenient from a diplomatic point of view.
sure.
And it actually has a very volatile and changing energy mix because they have to ensure energy security. So they appeal to the political market worldwide by saying they're green, and they appeal to a very mixed and changing energy market in the domestic area because they have to satisfy the user's needs.
True. True. That's why when a lot of Germans talk about the energy transition, I'm a little bit skeptical. They
I'm
call it
completely skeptical.
the energy vendor, but I look at the energy mix and I say, wow, that's not very clean, at least from a Southern Europe perspective,
I
which
mean, who's really committed to an energy transition? Norway. But their oil
yes,
production is in strong decline.
true, true,
But
true,
it's also a pragmatic decision. I
true,
mean, the North Sea is dry. It's convenient for them to switch.
true. That's a good point. And they already have this massive pensions fund that can sustain
Exactly.
the country for decades and decades. Aaron is in Norway, so we'll do another webinar, perhaps with more time, and to be you and Aaron, we can give you because he's at the center of the oil and gas industry, which is in Stavanger, because we founded NLM at Coventry together, and he used to take our students to the Museum of Petroleum at Stavanger. And now Norway
Oh,
has
wow.
this idea, oh, let's switch for the energy transition. And you have a point. It's because mainly they don't need it anymore. Even in Portugal. So I knew a few people in government here that work on the energy. And the menu is in Portugal, you say, oh, we have a clean energy mix. But I used to say, yeah, you have a very clean electricity matrix because your energy matrix is still very based on fossils.
Exactly.
70%.
And for example, the size of Norway and the population of Norway,
Yeah, it's minuscule.
it's minuscule. I remember
Minuscule.
the former CEO of Pemex saying that one of the neighborhoods in Mexico City
Yes.
was larger than Norway because Mexico City, we have 20 million inhabitants.
It's quite significant. It's quite significant.
Exactly. So that county was, I think, 3 or 4 million. What's the population of Norway?
Probably 4 to 5 million at
Now,
this
but
point.
but I think then the Alvaro Obregón County was larger than Norway.
Okay. Okay. So let me ask you this, which touches what you have mentioned. Do you think that the energy transition also you mentioned the impact on relationship between food, water, and energy, and I think this is not very well understood. So, for instance, in Portugal and Spain, as you know, because you speak Spanish and you can understand Portuguese as well, and speak it to some extent.
Portuñol.
One of the issues is the issues of desertification. You can feel that Portugal and Spain are becoming more and more dry, and there's a lot
Exactly.
of water
And so is
scarcity.
Mexico. So is
Okay,
Mexico. We have no water.
yeah,
And
that's a
we've
big
had
issue. So how?
we've had severe droughts in Mexico, and local agriculture is being impacted by the droughts. And strangely enough, we're big importers of grains from the US, but also from the Ukraine. I
Interesting.
mean, as a personal anecdote, because I'm a storyteller, I have 3 horses, and suddenly the feed for my horses was outrageously expensive. Feeding
Okay.
them was more expensive than feeding me, my whole family.
Wow.
So I call the producer of the feedstock, and I ask him, and he's from Guadalajara, and I say, "What's going on with your product?" And it's because I import yellow corn from the Ukraine and from the United States, and I'm saying, "Say what? You
Interesting. I didn't know
use
that.
imported yellow corn from Ukraine, and the United States should produce your horse feed?" And he said,
That-
"Yes."
That's very interesting because this is something that perhaps for another panel, but how do you think that the issues of supply chains that that also were critical during COVID, that you think countries will reverse partially globalization in order to solve these issues? So, for instance,
If we use renewables, yes.
okay,
We cannot have internationally, globally integrated markets with renewables.
okay, that's a
I
very,
mean, we've
very
had
interesting
enough,
point.
yeah, we've had enough problems building economies of scale in domestic. I don't believe there's a regional renewable energy market because of the issues of the transmission lines. At least I don't know of
True,
one.
not true. That's a
So
good point.
having a global energy market, if we use renewables, is technically unviable. I
True.
mean, you cannot put a transmission line across the Atlantic.
No, to be very inefficient.
That would be insane. I mean, just
Yes.
imagine that. We have
Yes.
we
Do you
have a
think
natural
also?
gas pipe. We have a natural gas pipeline that goes from Texas to the state of Veracruz, and
Okay.
that was a big feat. But we're not having transmissions lines from Texas to Campeche.
Do you think also this will change the way governments look at public enterprises? So, for instance, one of the issues which I mentioned is the issue of the developmental state, the idea that the state will direct the economy. It's an old approach. You know, I'm a liberal as well. I prefer a market-led based economy, but something that people are discussing in Europe and in developing countries, in Africa, in Asia, is the issue whether this model might be successful. The idea of very well-run state enterprises being internationalized, like Petronas. You come from the oil and gas industry, you know Petronas or the Indian ONGC, which just invested in Mozambique. Mozambique, which is Portuguese speaking, had one of the largest gas discoveries in the last 30 years. And the Indians are also investing in that. It's been developed by Total, I believe, and one is also, I believe, Exxon is there. I can't remember, but the biggest project is Total. They also had some security issues, but the Indians, because of the Indian Ocean, they need massive amounts of natural gas, which have been buying also from countries which are sanctioned, uh, Russia, Iran, others. So how what's your comments about that? Do you think this model will succeed? State-led enterprises again, but better run than in the past?
It depends on the capacity of the state to being an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And it depends on the political and economic motivations. It largely depends on the state being able to be an entrepreneur. For example, us liberals tend to think that the state cannot be a successful and efficient entrepreneur.
True.
And I would say that Petrobras, before Dilma Rousseff, was an incredible state enterprise.
True.
An incredible. I think Saudi Aramco is still an incredible state enterprise.
Good point.
So it has to be looked at case by case. Because the problem with companies becoming state-owned is that they start responding to political incentive rather than to commercial incentives.
So we have the tissues. So
and
for
that
instance,
can ruin and that can ruin their governance very easily.
To appoint someone from the ruling party or someone affiliated with the president or something, and very easily you damage the company. So going forward,
Exactly.
another issue I wanted you to comment is the issue of critical minerals. This is a big issue, at least in the African continent, but not just. I would say in Brazil, there's a debate on that now because of Lula and the political situation in Asia
In Mexico too.
as well. Can you elaborate your views on the critical minerals? Because Europe they have a big talk about the energy transition, but one of the big issues is the poverty of minerals. They don't have many minerals. They have to be imported from somewhere. So I know people from the
And
Commission
mhm.
that are working on that, and I keep mentioning, yeah, but you don't have any minerals. You basically have to import that. It's still a dependency. You are still vulnerable. So how do you solve this?
I mean, against we have the resource curse that minerals are generally located in underdeveloped for countries with insufficient rule of law.
Mm.
So my main concern there is our human rights violations, especially in the area of labor. Whether we're going to be saving the planet environmentally, which is very questionable because of the environmental impact of minerals, of mining, which also has a significant environmental impact, especially when you talk about open mining operations, open
True.
sky mining operation, and also the issue of labor is very preoccupying. In Mexico, we have a very poor record of respecting labor rights, primarily not only by the Mexican mining companies, but but also by the Canadian mining companies. And it's really interesting to see because Mexico is not like African countries like Nigeria or like Angola in terms of the mineral potential, but it's got and the president just started hallucinating that we have a ton of lithium.
Okay.
But our big reserves of lithium are in sand deposits and are very hard to exploit. And the National Geological Survey already said that particular deposit of minerals is very hard to exploit. But if there's, but it's still an extractive activity.
True.
So what would be the difference if we have violations of human rights in the extractive activities of oil and gas, and we have environmental impacts due to poor regulation? What makes us think that the exploitation of critical minerals will be any different? And also, you need infrastructure to get to the mineral. You need
True.
roads. You need hydrocarbons. You need
True.
transport.
True.
So it might be the same or worse.
True.
I don't know if
This is
you
a,
read, I think
it's a good point.
NRGI just reissued a report
No, I haven't
regarding
read it.
mineral extraction in Africa. And I was disarrayed when I saw that the exploitation of minerals in Africa could be done with any secondary environmental or labor impacts. And I
That's
and
that's the big
I
issue.
asked, and I said,
That's the big
what
issue.
happened to these people? Because because they've been so zealous. I mean, they're a little step below the intensity of Greenpeace, and suddenly they come out with this report, and I said, and I sent it to the country manager of Energy in Mexico, and I said, is this a faux piece? Was this released without your consent? And so, no, we completely endorsed it. And I was mind blown.
Interesting. Please
Because
send
I
me.
think, yes, I'll send it to you because I was flabbergasted.
No, one of the issues that I'm concerned is the impact of mining, because Angola still has to improve a lot. I recommended Angola to join the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative because
EITI?
yes, and the government don't know if they read it, but they just joined. But one of the issues is the issues the issues of the impact of money in labor rights in local communities. And most of it is done by these foreign companies. So I'm quite concerned about that as well. And the other issue is the issue, just like you mentioned, the issue of the supply chains. I don't want Africa just to export minerals. I
Well,
want it to.
that's exactly the resource curse. If we're to remain banana republics, what's the point of all this energy transition?
Precisely, that's the issue. So, for instance, one of the debates that people are having in my own country are the issues of creating a petrochemical industry. And I told them, look, we need at least to export some added value into this oil and
But
gas.
that purpose, you need natural gas and you need oil.
Yes, yes, we have oil and natural gas, but not many countries do. So this is a big issue. So 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 just to wrap up, I don't want to because I
No, I've been
hopefully
delighted speaking to you.
yeah. So this talk will be available with your permission, of course, in YouTube. I will spread it in my own networks, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, in the different working groups I'm working. So hopefully in the future, let's do something more interactive with more guests, and I'll put you. And I promise I'll be just a moderator. But because
No, this has been superb. I mean, I was worried
yes,
that I was going to have to speak for an hour nonstop.
yes.
So actually, no,
No,
I'm
no,
very
your
happy
views
that
are
this is
actually
a dialogue.
quite enlightening, at least for myself that is working in Europe,
No,
but
it was
also
enlightening
works.
for me. I mean, I love this dialogue about Angola, Mexico.
Yes,
I'm sorry that we couldn't include Norway, but
no,
I'm
let's do it.
I'll be happy to have a multinational panel on energy issues.
Yes,
And
it's something that me and Aaron will provide with guest speakers from the countries that we are working. Norway, people in Germany, because I know a lot of people in Germany. The main issue I have is that they are very I can say ambitious. Let's put it in that talk, and I don't and I don't think it's you can replicate what happened in Germany, considering all of these issues.
what
Uh,
do you mean by
because
ambitious?
what I mean is that they talk green, but they're
Oh
not green.
no, they're adamant, not
Yes,
ambitious. Yes.
adamant,
Well,
adamant.
they're intense. That's why they have the most powerful philosophers, writers, and musicians in the world too.
Yes, of course, of course. So can you do a summary of this talk so we can wrap it up? We can wrap it up. So basically, the question I'll ask you is: how do you see the energy transition in Mexico, specifically in North America, and how do you see globally? Because the points that you've raised, particularly the issues of water, energy, and food, and I think this is a big issue in the majority of African countries. Angola is a bit different because we have a lot of water in terms of potential, huge amounts of water. Not in the south. In the south, we have issues, but I would say water it's quite abundant in the country in general. But I would say that the majority of African countries are not that blessed with rivers, with a lot of different climates and different uh, areas which are just empty of people. So, what advice can you give, given to countries like Portugal? Because many of my guests will listen to this talk from a Portuguese perspective, and there are huge issues in terms of desertification and lack of water in the Iberian Peninsula. So, what kind of advice can you give? An advice to the European Commission, because I know a few people that work there, and I would say that some of the plans are just non-realistic because of this dependency on minerals that and I would say in supply chains also that come from Asia. Most of the solar panels, most of these batteries come from Asia. They're not even uh, being made in Europe. So can you do a summary where you encompass all of that?
Well, basically, you have to ponder energy security versus market price. That would be my first recommendation. If it's cheaper to import and you have a reliable provider, keep importing. What's the problem with that? If you don't see an interruption, possible disruptions due to geopolitical sources, it's no problem if you import.
Right.
You can do so more efficiently. If you do see a geopolitical threat, and I don't see how, and I can't believe Germany didn't see that on the behalf of Russia. Yep. And they say hindsight is 2020, but I can't believe that the Germans, who are so pragmatic, believed that they could keep on importing natural gas from Russia forever and a day when they had Putin as the head of state forever and a day. And there's no upcoming signs that he will be leaving anytime soon. So if you have a geopolitically safe partner that provides cheaper energy, take it. But take a really close look at your domestic energy basket and use it as efficiently and as safely as you can. And I think that's a huge mistake Mexico has made, that we have a ton of sun, we have a ton of wind, and we're still hydrocarbon based. So for energy security purposes, not so much for climate related causes, because I'm skeptical about that. I'm not a climate denier, but I'm a climate skeptic. And also it's a scientific discussion, and I'm not a scientist. Right. So I have to, I'm still working on that to come to sensible conclusions. So look at your energy basket and think of what you can do with it to minimize environmental impacts.
Good point.
Pollution and related illnesses have a high social cost. So you don't need to prove the existence of climate change to use alternative fuel sources whenever they are plentiful and efficient. Number 3, do everything you can to eradicate energy poverty and to ensure energy justice, because there will be, I said this the other day in a forum, and the auditorium almost caught on fire, because I said energy today is like Gaza. There will be no peace without justice. People are going to keep on voting for populist, anti-market governments if they lack secure, clean, modern, and reliable energy sources. And you need to have legal security, and therefore the peace it provides for investors to invest, to secure an investment. And this cannot be ignored when in Mexico, 40 million people like reliable, secure, modern, clean sources of energy in their homes. This has huge ramifications. So look at markets, look at energy security, ensure you address the issues of energy poverty and energy justice. And that's really simplistic, but that's where I would begin. And I'm sort of tired. I'm sort of tired of looking at the UN's ODS because they're so ethereal.
True. I had a debate with a former colleague that was in government in Portugal. She is very interesting on that. A discussion, I wouldn't say a debate that these objectives, in order to be materialized, need a kind of mechanism of implementation. You cannot just use it as slogans. See something.
Exactly. But rather than slogans, you have to commit to them for a long time.
True, true.
And in volatile political scenarios, they cannot be implemented. I mean, the U.S. was pretty consistent up until the time Trump won.
True.
I mean, even the United States became protectionistic and volatile, so that was another surprise.
True. True. And we might have Trump again in November.
Yes, I think here he comes.
Yes, yes, of course. I think the world is changing. So thanks, Miriam, once again.
Oh, no problem.
Hopefully
That
in the
was
future, I'll bring you to do the panel when Aaron feels well. We have another idea for a big project that will and you are included, of course. I'll keep you posted. And thanks once again for this amazing presentation. So, and hopefully, and good luck for the elections in Mexico. I hope that the best candidate wins. I don't know much about the politics of Mexico. I just follow it from afar, looking at friends and talking with you. But count with my support as well for anything you need. I work mainly in Europe, but also with the African continent. Also, I didn't tell you, but one of the issues, and I forgot to mention, is the issue you touch, is the issue of regional integration. In Africa, more than the African Union, which basically it's just a political organization, you have regional organizations like in Southern Africa, West Africa, Eastern Africa. And I would say that regional integration of energy markets will happen in those regional organizations, not at the African Union, which doesn't do much, I'll be honest, unfortunately. And hopefully I'll bring you to discuss this, but really like what you just said in terms of your advice, the idea of looking at energy poverty, energy justice, looking at security of energy versus markets, and the good interaction that we can do out of that. So thanks, Miriam, once again. So this, just like I said, it's going to be heard by many people, and some people also of influence, and hopefully we can create new projects out of it. So.
Oh yes, I would love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Boa noite.